inspired real-life events. Narrator Arif grew up in a quiet rural town on the outskirts of Rangpur where life felt like it was moving in slow circles rather than straight lines. Where every morning began with the sound of roosters, distant azan, and the soft rhythm of people trying to survive another ordinary day. And from his childhood, he learned something that no teacher ever explicitly taught him, that dreams in his environment were not discouraged loudly but quietly delayed, pushed into the future until they slowly disappeared under the weight of responsibility. And his father was a modest school teacher who believed deeply in discipline and honesty, earning a limited salary that somehow carried the entire household forward through careful planning and sacrifice, while his mother lived her life in silent service, always making sure nothing in the house collapsed, even when everything outside felt uncertain. And Arif grew up observing this pattern of quiet endurance, learning early that struggle was not an event but a continuous state of life. And he was not a child who attracted attention in school, not extraordinary, not invisible. Just someone who listened more than he spoke, sat near the window more than the front bench, and observed the world with a kind of curiosity that slowly turned into restlessness as he grew older. And by the time he finished his studies, he felt something inside him that refused to settle into the predictable life everyone around him expected. Because life then presented him with two paths that looked simple on paper but felt heavy in reality. One was a stable government-adjacent clerical job in a nearby town with fixed salary, fixed routine, and predictable future that everyone called security, while the other was an uncertain opportunity in a small startup in the city that promised nothing except long hours, instability, and the possibility of building something meaningful from the ground up. And for days, Arif lived in silence with this decision, because every conversation he heard pushed him towards safety. Every elder advised him stability. Every logical explanation supported a comfortable life. But inside him, there was a different kind of pressure, not loud but persistent, like a thought that kept returning no matter how many times he tried to ignore it. And one evening, he sat with his father in their small courtyard under the fading orange sky, watching life pass slowly on the road outside. And after a long silence, he asked, "Baba, what if I choose the risky path and fail completely?" And his father looked at him, not with fear, but with the calmness of someone who had lived through enough uncertainty to understand its meaning. And he said, "Failure is not the opposite of success, it is part of it. But regret is the thing that never lets you sleep peacefully." And those words settled inside Arif in a way that no advice before ever had. And after nights of internal conflict, where fear and ambition kept replacing each other in his mind, he finally made his decision to join the startup, stepping into a city environment that felt fast, unfamiliar, and unpredictable from the very first day, because the office was small, the walls slightly worn, the desks mismatched, and the people inside were young, uncertain, and constantly learning through mistakes, and nothing felt stable. Not even the direction they were moving in. And in the beginning, Arif tried to adapt quickly, working long hours, learning systems, observing workflows, trying to prove himself through effort and discipline. But soon he realized that effort without clarity often leads to exhaustion rather than progress. And there were nights when he returned to his rented room completely drained, sitting in silence while the ceiling fan above him rotated endlessly, as if time itself had lost direction. And in those moments, he would think about home, about his mother, preparing simple meals with care, about his father returning late from school, exhausted but still correcting students' papers. And a strange mixture of guilt and determination would rise inside him, because every step forward in the city felt like a step away from his old life. And in the startup, he met people like Farhan, Imran, Sohel, Imtiaz, Sohazala, Rafi, and Adil, each carrying their own invisible struggles, each trying to turn uncertainty into something meaningful. And together they formed a fragile ecosystem, held together not by certainty, but by shared confusion, ambition, and silent hope. And often they would sit late at night, surrounded by unfinished ideas, whiteboards filled with half-drawn plans, and empty cups of tea that had gone cold hours ago. And Imran once said with a tired smile, "If this works, people will call us lucky, and if it fails, no one will even remember we tried." And they all laughed softly. But the silence that followed carried more truth than the joke itself. And as months passed, the startup entered a difficult phase where funding delays started affecting salaries. Clients became inconsistent, and pressure slowly turned into an invisible weight that followed everyone everywhere. And Arif found himself becoming more observant, more thoughtful, speaking less but analyzing more, because he realized that in unstable environments, reaction creates chaos, but observation creates direction. And during this time, his family back home also began facing subtle difficulties, especially his father, whose health started weakening after years of continuous teaching and stress. Though he never expressed it openly, and Arif would come regularly, trying to sound normal, hearing reassurances that everything was fine, not realizing that those reassurances were often meant to protect him from distraction. Until one night, everything changed when his phone rang late, and his mother's voice came through broken and unstable, saying, "Your father collapsed today." And in that moment, everything inside Arif stopped completely, because suddenly deadlines, meetings, and ambitions felt meaningless compared to the fear of losing someone who had been the foundation of his entire existence. And he rushed back home immediately, traveling through a journey that felt longer than physical distance. And when he reached the hospital and saw his father lying weak, connected to machines, breathing slowly and irregularly, Arif felt something inside him break in a way he could not put into words, because the man he had always seen as strong now looked fragile, human, and temporary. And he sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the weight of years of sacrifice inside that single touch. And his father slowly opened his eyes and said with effort, "Don't stop your life because of me. Just make it meaningful." And those words entered Arif like something permanent that could not be removed. And after days of uncertainty, his father's condition stabilized, but never fully returned to what it once was. And Arif went back to the city, carrying a different version of himself, one that no longer saw success as ambition alone but as responsibility. And the startup soon reached one of its most critical phases, where everything felt like it could collapse at any moment. And one rainy night, when the office was nearly empty and silence filled every corner, Arif sat with Farhan and Imran, listening to the rain hitting the glass like a slow reminder of uncertainty. And Farhan said quietly, "Maybe this is where most people stop." And Imran replied after a pause, "Or maybe this is where people finally understand what they are made of." And Arif stayed silent for a long time, feeling everything he had lived until that moment collide inside him. The struggle, the fear, the responsibility, the distance from home, the memory of his father's words. And then he finally spoke slowly, "If we stop now, everything becomes just pain. But if we continue, even pain becomes part of something meaningful. And that night, they did not quit. Instead, they rebuilt everything from the ground up, rethinking strategies, restructuring operations, learning from mistakes instead of avoiding them. And slowly, step by step, things began to shift. Not suddenly, but gradually, like light returning after a long darkness. And years passed with continuous effort, and Arif changed deeply through that journey, becoming more grounded, more patient, more aware that success is not about speed but about endurance. And one evening, after a long day, he stood on the rooftop of the office building with Farhan and Imran beside him, watching the city lights stretch endlessly into the horizon. And Imran said quietly, "We almost gave up many times." And Arif replied with calm certainty, "Yes, but every time we continued, we built a stronger version of ourselves." And in that moment, he understood something permanent. That life is not defined by how easy the path is, but by the decision to keep walking when the path becomes uncertain. And every hardship carries a lesson that only time reveals, and every choice shapes a future version of yourself. You will one day meet with understanding. And as the wind moved across the city, he realized that true strength is not never falling, but choosing to rise again after every fall. And the real meaning of life is not found in avoiding struggle, but in transforming it into direction. Because in the end, a person is not measured by the comfort they choose, but by the resilience they build when comfort disappears. And that truth stayed with him like a quiet light that never faded, reminding him that every ending people fear is often just the beginning of finally becoming who they were always meant to be.